Just a little bit of a personal note I'd like to say to start with. I first came to St Ives when I was 4 months old to visit my great-grandmother who lived in the middle of town. And it's a funny old life, isn't it, that you suddenly realise you're coming back now. And now here I am, 110 years later, talking to you in the Guildhall in St Ives. So it's a funny sort of circular thing. It took me 58 years, by the way, to get back to Cornwall, but I'm very glad that we made it. Dowsing is a funny old thing. You mention it to some people and they look at you completely bewildered. Or they say, that's something to do with water, isn't it? Or they say, I haven't a clue, mate. Or they say, that's witchcraft, isn't it? Well, it's some of those things, but not all of them. I first got into dowsing when, I think it was, my mid-40s. I picked up an advertisement in the local parish magazine where Jill and I lived at that time in South Herefordshire. And it was from a chap and he just said, I fancy learning how to dowse. If you'd like to learn with me, come along to the village hall, 7:30 Thursday week. And I thought, dowsing, something to do with water, isn't it? Might be fun, I'm looking for something else. There must be more to life than taxi driving or working. And so I went along, and you know, this little tiny hamlet in the middle of South Herefordshire, 60 people turned up, which was quite remarkable. And that group is still going today. So we started doing all sorts of funny things with dowsing. We were learning together, nobody knew anything about it. We got into all sorts of funny scrapes, but we were trying everything from finding lost archaeological remains, which we found, and to ghosts, which sometimes we found, all sorts of things, water. But I remember my very first experience was we were taken up, the leader said, right, we're off, we're going to look for water. This farmer needs a borehole, and so we're going to look for water. And I thought, I knew nothing about this at all. All I had was my pair of wire coat hangers. Do you remember the wire coat hangers? They're all plastic now, aren't they? Had my wire coat hangers, didn't know what to do with them. And everybody spread out, and they said, there you are, just point your rods there and go and find water. And of course, I didn't know what on earth to do. And one thing that amazed me straight away, there was a little old lady in the group, and those of you who are old enough to remember the original Last of the Summer Wine series might remember Laura Batty. And there was a Laura Batty look-alike, bless her. Big floppy hat, big floppy mat, wrinkled stockings, and she was dowsing with one of these, a bath plate. And I thought, I don't know what anything to do with this. This is completely off the wall. Little did I know that actually she got it right, because with a pendulum, all you need is something on the end of a bit of string. You don't need a fancy crystal or anything. But from that point on, it was interesting that I got invited to give talks about dowsing, even though I was learning it. And then, can you come and teach our History Society a bit of dowsing? And so we did that. And then at the same time, the Dowsing Society was putting together a whole programme of courses. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting, because I was aware at that time it was really hard to learn how to dowse properly. There were tutors around the country, but they were very variable quality. And so I began to help with that. And then one day I had a phone call saying, oh, the society has moved to Malvern in Worcestershire from Kent. We're looking for a director. Would you like to apply? So I thought, oh, I won't get that. I was in career number 2 at the time, getting fed up with that, so I thought, well, I'll give it a go. Of course, I got the job. 9 years later, there we go, that was another 9 years of life. But that did give me an ideal opportunity to meet other dowsers from all over the world and to go to all sorts of workshops, talks and presentations. So that was a really fantastic experience for me. By that time, Jill, my wife and I'm really lucky to have been able to turn a hobby into a job that my wife can tolerate and actually join in with. And so we always work as a twosome and have done ever since. We started to try and sort out people's houses, which is a particular interest of mine, sort of bad vibes in a house, if you like. And we did that for 20 years until gave it up a couple of years ago. So I sort of, my dowsing is divided into three things. It's exploring things like I'm going to be talking about this evening, and teaching, which we still do, mostly based in Marazion, and I'm next running a beginner's day in the autumn, and the work that, actually real work, sorting out people's energetic problems in their houses. And that to me was the proof that dowsing does work. It's all very well talking about stone circles and the energies from stones and all the rest of it, but actually at the end of the day, if someone's got a problem in their house and you manage to sort it out and they tell you it worked, you've transformed it, you've done a wonderful thing, then that to me says, well, there's something in all this. And so that's what my yardstick was always. So this evening I'm assuming a little knowledge. I know we've got one or two dowsers here, so I apologise for lots of stuff that you'll know already, but I thought I'd take you through some of the basic principles of what on earth dowsing is before we actually move on to the ancient sites themselves. I have a very simple, no-nonsense, no fussy approach to my dowsing. There's nothing magic about it. It's simply, I believe, an application of the natural intuition that we all have. Everybody can do it. I'm sure that you've all sat in someone's room or been in a place where you suddenly think, I don't really like this very much, I feel quite uncomfortable, I think I would quite like to go. And the converse. You sit in some places where you're thinking, this is fantastic, I love this, I could sit here forever. If you've felt that, that's your little scanner beginning to work. And dowsing is a development of that initial skill. So it's something that everybody is rediscovering as they learn to douse. It's an innate skill, I believe. It's not a gift. There's not certain periods. You don't have to be the seventh son of the seventh son or anything like that. Anybody can do it, providing they learn how to do it properly and then practice, practice, practice. That's the boring bit. So, people will often say, what on earth is this dowsing? And there are loads of actual definitions of dowsing. Some very wordy, but I prefer this. Finding things beyond the five senses and finding out about things beyond the five senses. As simple as that. So I don't go around choosing a cabbage as to whether that's the best one to buy that day. I can't see the point of that. I look at it. I use my senses that I'm lucky enough to have. But anything that you don't know about or you can't see, dowsing can be a very interesting skill. Mostly used for water, mainly because dowsing for water, obviously it's a terrifically useful skill. The Dowsing Society was actually formed by retired Royal Engineers from the Army when they were taught to douse on expeditions, and they still are, even though they don't like admitting it, because they would get mocked. But they still use it. Archaeology, underground pipe strains and cables. I don't know about you, but I've quite often, in various houses that we've had builders in and they've got to dig holes or whatever. It's amazing how many of them get a pair of dowsing rods out of the van and discover where the mains are, where the pipes are, where the cables are. And to them it's just another tool in the box. Nothing magic about it. If it didn't work, they wouldn't do it, is what I say to people that doubt these things. Earth energy lines, I'll be talking about that later, and various energetic forms, which sounds terribly enigmatic. That's because it's a very wide application. And one thing that Kelly said at the start, I realised I forgot to put on, was health and well-being. There are lots of dowsers who specialise in that sort of work. So how does it work? Anybody got any ideas?
Yes.
No. If you ask about a dozen dowsers in a room how it works, they'd all probably come out with their own pet theory. It's very hard to explain. And to be honest, even though some people might say they know, as far as I can find out, and as far as within my experience, nobody really knows how it works. But I personally think it comes back to that intuition, the application of intuition and intent. Some people will say that all the knowledge, everything that's ever happened, is stored somewhere, whether the universe is a hologram or whatever, but there's a source of all knowledge that somehow with dowsing you can tap into. Some people call it the information field. Some people call it God. It's all sorts of ideas come out. But I'm not suggesting I've got a hotline to God, but don't get me wrong there. But I just think that all the information is there. I think that everything that's ever happened is still happening in that time slot, which is why you're dowsing. You've got to be very aware of that. You've got to imagine that that is the right place to be. So if I'm looking at a field, flat field, featureless field, and I've been told that once there was an abbey or a monastery there, and it's now gone, and people want to know where it is. It's no good me saying, where's the wall now? Because there might be stones, including around the village and all the buildings, there might be stones buried all over the place. So you've got to put your question of your dowsing into a time slot. Where was the wall when the abbey was in use? And then you slot yourself into that time zone. And it does seem to work. Very peculiar. I like this slide. It's not a very good one, but I like to include it because this is our visible universe here. And it's that little section there. And everything else that's going on is invisible to us. Which does put things into perspective rather. We hear more and more about dark matter, dark energy, all this sort of stuff. It does seem to me now that everything is joined to everything else. And dowsing is somehow a way of tapping into that system. I mean, even now, we're learning that quite recently there was another article about the fungus under the ground is used by the trees to communicate with each other. You know, a few years ago you thought, yeah, that's barking, isn't it? But actually now the science has come out and said it. So it is quite interesting. This slide I like as well. This is a real experiment where a chap put neon light bulbs, just stuck them in the ground, underneath some high tension power cables. And that picture was on the front page of the Independent newspaper about 25 years ago, and that caught my eye then. That actually the energy from the cables, which you can't see, has actually been enough to activate the neon tubes. Remarkable, isn't it? And there we are. If you can't see it, it doesn't mean it isn't there. Okay. Now, I use the term earth energies a bit. It's a peculiar term, and over the years, the Dowsing Society has wrestled with a better word than energy. And it's a term that upsets scientists more than anything else when we talk about energy. I'm not against science at all. I think it's wonderful. I'm standing here today because of science, I assure you. But because there are no instruments that can pick up what it is we're picking up, they have difficulty in accepting that it's real. And I think the energy was always the wrong word to use. I don't know what the right word is, but it's something different. You see, this sort of dowsing is very different to dowsing for a pipe and a cable or an archaeological remains. You know, that's what we call tangible dowsing. In other words, you can dowse, you can find it, you dig a hole, and there it is. Tangible dowsing. With this stuff, it's intangible. And so it's very much down to individual interpretation and what the individual finds. And believe me, that causes so many arguments in the dowsing world because people get very passionate about what they're finding and what their worldview is on all this stuff. But it's a difficult concept. But the energy that we're talking about, whatever it is from the Earth or coming onto the Earth from the Sun and even the planets. It's something to do with the geometric field that we think now. A lot of the energies seem to be linked to geological faults, volcanic plugs, that sort of thing. There's some sort of relationship there. But yeah, interesting. It's a very, very wide subject. I think the key to all of this, when you're actually dowsing, anything really, is visualization. And I think that I, for instance, have built up over the years a library of pictures because it enables me to identify and focus on what I'm trying to find. Many years ago, one of the members of our group in South Herefordshire, he was a member of the time team, production team, in the old days when there were some dyed-in-the-wool archaeologists there who really did not like dowsing. So he kept it very quiet that he was learning. And one day he came back from one of their expeditions, excavating an Iron Age site, I think, and they'd been looking for a water source, pretty essential to life, couldn't find it, and one of his mates said to him when they'd gone off for their lunch, he said, "You do a bit of dowsing, can't you find the spring? There must be a spring here somewhere, can't see one." And he said, "Well, I'll have a go, but I haven't been learning dowsing very long." So he toddled off across the field with his dowsing rods, and eventually got a reaction, and probably against all the regulations for the archaeological dig, but they dug a little hole, and dug and dug and dug, and the spade hit something hard and metallic, dug it around it, and it was a very old, rusty tractor spring. And he was so horrified at this, he'd done work, dowsing, load of rubbish, absolute load of rubbish, covered the hole up quickly, didn't say anything about it. Came back and I was chatting to him about this. He said, "I just don't know what went wrong there." And I said to him, well, because I didn't know, I'm not pretending I've always got the answers. But I said to him, well, what were you thinking about? What were you visualising? I said, was it a picture of a spring, water bubbling up through the ground, or was it the word? He said, "Oh, I don't know." Thought about it for a little while and said, "I think it was the word." I said, "Well, there you are, well done, you got it." That's what you were asking for, a spring, you got a spring. And that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. So dowsing has an infinite ability to lead you up the garden path if you're not precise about it. Your questions have to have the answer yes or no, not any degree of maybes or don't know or perhaps. It's got to be really, really precise. And when you're trying to find out about something, you might have to ask 20 questions or so. It's quite hard to remember to ask the right sort of question. So it is terrifically important. I've seen so many times, and I'm doing this the best one in the world. You talk about dowsing. Oh yeah, I can do dowsing. I can do dowsing, and I get my dowsing rods and I walk across the room and look, my rods are just going like mad, And I say, well, what are you looking for? Oh, I don't know. Radio is switched on but not tuned into any station is the answer. So it's very much about focusing on a very, very specific task, and you've got to keep on with it. When I used to douse people's houses, be dowsing around the outside of the building, and people would say, "Oh well," get a reaction and say, "Oh, you're probably mixing that up with the electricity cable." You don't say that to a dowser. Really upsets us, that does, because I'm looking for the water pipe, and if I got a reaction, it's not an electricity cable, it's a water pipe. You have to have faith in your ability. So yeah, the old dowsing rods are an invaluable tool. I use the dowsing rods, which can be anything by the way, to find things, going back to my original what is dowsing. I use the dowsing rods to find things, and I use my pendulum to find out about things, because I can ask a lot more questions a lot more quickly with my pendulum. So it's a combination. Not everybody works like that. Some dowsers will always use the pendulum, some will always use rods. It's an individual choice thing. So visualization is really important. We've got to really be specific about what we're looking for. So how on earth do we dowse for an energy line? What do you see as an energy line? Well, some people think of it as a slightly translucent shower curtain waving in front of them. Other people have little wavy lines, sparkly little energy, whether electrical impulses or something like that. Doesn't really seem to matter. Just as if I'm trying to find a water pipe, I visualise a blue polypropylene pipe is my picture. I still seem to find that pipe, whether or not it's a black polypropylene pipe or an old iron one, doesn't seem to make any difference. It's just the fact that it's about that subject and about being very specific about it. So yeah, earth energies, that's what I see, and other people will have other ideas about what they're looking for. So the water is an interesting subject. We have a complete dearth of water dowsers in this country now. And it's such a shame, because it's an amazing skill to have, and you can make a lot of money out of being a water dowser. Believe me, people will pay for you to find boreholes and wells and leaks in pipes and all the rest of it. You know, there's a lot of demand for it. But unfortunately, during the 1990s and into the time when I was with the Society, dowsing for earth energies and dowsing for healing and well-being got really popular. They were the latest sexy thing to do, and who on earth would want to join a load of old blokes who still like dowsing for water? It's interesting that in France, for instance, the two factions like that divided a long time ago, and they're now completely different societies. We've managed to keep together in Britain, but it's interesting that it's a different approach. People, skeptics will say, oh well, if you dig a hole anywhere in Britain you'll hit water. That's really not true. That's really not true, probably especially at the moment. If someone's got cattle and they need a borehole, how big is the herd? How much water do they need every day? Will that water source be constant right through the year? Is it the right quality of water? Is where I think the water is obtainable? Can we get there? Or has it got some lovely great blocks of granite in the way? All these sorts of questions mean that a water dowser has to be incredibly precise. They've got to know a lot about geology, and they've got to have an incredibly good relationship. Be quiet! They've got an incredibly good relationship with the driller, because if the driller just goes down at a slightly the wrong angle, then he can miss the stream altogether, or he can go through one stream and through the other, and the water just drains away underneath. So it's incredibly precise skill. So there we are, that's enough about water. But my point is that when we're looking at stone circles, standing stones, labyrinths, anything, any of these phenomena, the ability to dowse and recognise water is really important, because it's absolutely intrinsic to why the site is there, which is my first main point. Now, we're not talking about rainwater, we're talking about water that comes down right deep from under the earth. And I thought it was wonderful that after years of realising that not an awful lot is known about the hydrological cycle, which surprised me. You know, why do you get a spring on the top of a hill, for instance? How does that work? And at last, because we've always said that the water, quite a lot of the water comes from a sort of condensing process under the ground. And at last they've come out and said that realised that water is produced from the condensing process. So that is interesting, and that's the sort of water we're interested in. And in every stone circle that I've ever dowsed, I've found water underneath. Of course, I can't prove it. Because strangely, English heritage don't want people digging holes in stone circles, which is a shame. But there we go. Right, how are we doing? Not yet. Okay, now, so yes, before you start to dowse for anything else, you've got to learn to dowse for water. And a lot of people forget that. And through all the courses we run, it's very much part of what we teach as well. Not professionally, of course, I wouldn't dream of doing that. So many people will say, oh yeah, ley lines. Excuse me, let's talk about water. Oh, I know about ley lines. Ley lines, yeah. Well, they'll bring us up and say, I've got a ley, they always talk like this, I've got a ley line running right through my house. And you say, oh yeah, really? Now, to a dowser like me, sorting out people's houses, a ley line term is a nonsense. And it's a nonsense term because a ley, I believe, comes from an ancient English, Anglo-Saxon word meaning a long straight meadow. And so actually, by saying ley line, you're saying line. I mean, it's as daft as saying River Avon, because Avon is the British word for river anyway. So, yeah, ley line is a tricky one. We blame the Americans for bringing it over in the early 70s, and they blame us. We'll never find out who it was. We've tried to find out where it originated, but it's a very difficult phrase because what people say as a ley line is often an alignment. And alignments were identified by a chap in Herefordshire called Alfred Watkins in the early 1920s. And people say, I've seen it written so many times it drives me mad. But you say, oh yeah, I know about ley lines and Alfred Watkins, yeah. Now, they obviously have never read his book. So Alfred Watkins wasn't a dowser. He was a very clever man, but he wasn't a dowser. But he did sort of have this vision of ancient and important sites being linked together by straight lines. In his book, he calls them lays. He doesn't mention ley lines at all. He later called them archaic trackways, actually, at one stage. But this is an example of an alignment. And you see, one of the problems is with them is that you've got different sites. You've got a burial mound there, you've got something called Stonehenge there. I think it's a stone circle somewhere. Old Sarum, earthwork, Salisbury Cathedral, Cadbury Ring, I can't read that on this side, and Frankenbury Camp. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things there of completely different eras, thousands of years apart. Granted, some of them will be built on earlier sites, but nevertheless, it's one of the problems that is experienced with lines. Doubtless, I think some of these things are laid out in lines, but there have been some wonderful spoofs of lays. Actually, people did it with Woolworths stores when there was a Woolworths, and they did it with telephone boxes and all sorts of things. And you know, on dear old Britain, which is so heavily populated and amended, if you put a ruler on a map, you can line up anything you want. Nevertheless, it's a bit like ghosts. You know, 95% are explainable, 5% is really interesting. And it's the same with these. So they're generally alignments, and for a dowser, they are completely different to energy lines or energy lays or energy currents, completely different thing altogether. And for someone trying to fix houses, it's not an alignment that makes any difference at all, that's just a line on the map. It's the actual energy line that's going through the house that actually does it. That's why I needed to know, what is it? An alignment or an energy line? So basically the theory says that a minimum of 5 structures in a row within a 5-mile radius. Sometimes they do mix in with energy lines as well, of course, they're bound to, because they're going through all these wonderful old sites. But for me as a sort of energy dowser, I'm far more interested in energy lines than I am with lays. But I'm fighting a losing battle, and I like all these phrases that come in. There we go. So, lays, interesting alignments. All right, here's the first one that's going very close to here. It's the Michael alignment, which runs through the widest bit of England, apparently. I think it's 386 miles, from just south of Land's End, a place called Carnesbowl, right up to Hopton in Norfolk, up through the Danish-German border, looping around the world, through the south part of South New Zealand, and right the way around the world. It's an interesting major line. Now, there are also lots of other ones. There's a chap called Gary Bilcliffe, who's just explored the length of that one as well. Orkney's right down through the Isle of Wight. These are all over the place, these alignments. But what is really interesting is that with these major alignments, they've got energies flowing around them, and that's what triggers a lot of excitement amongst the Dowsers. Lots of research was done on this in the 1970s and 80s, all over the world, and people came up with different ideas of a grid of these things all over the place. There's different ones all around the world. Look. I mean, that one just can't be right, because it's saying the centre of the world is Scotland. I mean, what's that about? Well, we all know it's Cornwall. Okay. So, another debate is these energy layers, energy lines, energy currents, not alignments. There's a big school of thought that says they're always straight. I mean, what is straight on a globe? How can you get straight on a globe? You can't, can you? It's always going to be curved. And there's more thought now that actually it's not as simple as they're straight lines of energy. They are dowsable, so a dowser can identify them because they are made up of multi-layers of different frequencies of energy. And sometimes dowsers will attribute colours to those different frequencies. Very interesting. Very interesting. But locally, probably some of you will have heard of Hamish Miller, an internationally well-known dowser. And he and Paul Broadhurst decided in the early 1980s to explore what had been rediscovered by a very famous chap called John Michell, the Michael alignment, which is a straight line, more or less, which runs from down here, where we are, right through loads of really interesting sites to Hopton. So it's that line that I showed you on the other side. But the interesting thing was, they soon discovered that it's not just an alignment. There are actually two lines swinging around it. So the blue line there, lost my red, there it is. The blue line there is the alignment, and then the red and the green are the way the energies swoop around each other. Not almost like a caduceus. And they spent a long time travelling all the way across the country to identify that, and their book is called The Sun and the Serpent. And it's very well known, and Jill, through Penrith Press, still sells loads of them. So, and it's interesting that people get really captured by the idea of these energies. There are pilgrims walking the lines, there are musicians playing musical instruments. There was a woman with a horse and a dog came all the way. The dog had to keep stopping because he got sore feet. People do all sorts of things on them. Really interesting. And the fascinating thing is actually the interaction that we can have with these lines. And it might stretch your credibility a bit, but bear with me. But actually, I think 2011, it was decided to have a sort of festival of dowsing at the beginning of May Day time. And it was when I was working for the Society. And we got in touch with a woman who you may have heard of down here, Danu Fox, who had a fantastic voice. She was a great jazz singer in her younger days. But she founded groups called Earth Singers, which I think are still going, and they would go to sacred sites and sing. And what we arranged is that the Dowsers would meet up with all the local groups all the way through the country, and they all met up and they dowsed the width, the strength of the lines before the ceremony. And then at 3 o'clock, we all, right away, I think there were 17 different events going on across the country. We all did our little ceremonies, drumming, singing, just firing intent, about the health of the land and all this sort of thing. And then measured the lines afterwards. And they virtually doubled in size. And everybody was reporting very, very similar results. And that is a fantastic thing, I think, that somehow we are communicating with that on a very deep level. And it's something that means a great deal to us Earth Energy Dowsers. And it's something when a dowser is trying to resolve energetic problems in a house, you talk to the lines, just as you would talk to a ghost or anything else. You communicate with them like we talk to each other. And you can communicate. It's a remarkable thing. So anyway, the effects of that boost were felt several weeks afterwards all over the place. And every year, nearer to that date, local groups still do something similar. It's never been as big as the first one, unfortunately, but it's really important. And it's interesting because the effect on these lines doesn't need to be anything terribly specific. I know of a church in South Wales, where the vicar, who is totally into energies in his very ancient church, which would have been built on an ancient site, he measured the width of the energy lines all through the year at regular intervals. And he found two things: that the lines widened on a Sunday, and then they gradually went down, and if there was a service during the week, they'd come a bit out again. But the point of the point when they were strongest, widest, was Easter Sunday, which to people attending the church was obviously a deeply meaningful thing. It doesn't have to be a church. I had some friends who were following an energy line through the Midlands, and they found this line was going through Wolverhampton Wanderers football ground. And they got chatting to the groundsman there, and he was very interested in it because apparently there used to be a well in the middle of the ground. And the manager came out and got involved and got talked him to douse, and he said, "You can have some tickets for the match." So they dowsed the width of the line as it went through the football ground before and after the match. Same thing happened. So, that outpouring of human, whatever it is, that positive energy has that effect, which I think is quite remarkable. Don't you?
Yes.
Yes. Right. Okay. Now, St Michael's Mount is perhaps the most well-known and significant point in our landscape down here. It's an amazing place which is incredibly popular, if not too popular. And I expect, like most locals like us, you wouldn't dream of going there in the high season. But nevertheless, it's a significant place because 4 of the major earth energy lines run through that point. If you're looking from the land and you look on the right-hand side of the mount, you'll see that ledge, that rock, which looks as if it's tumbling down. And just on that ledge there, the 4 lines cross. This was discovered by Hamish Miller. And it's an incredibly powerful place. And it's that side, I don't know if any of you have been on the west side. For years you had to either climb over the fence and hope nobody noticed, because it's closed to the public. And then they started charging so much per person to go there with a guide. And then they started saying there was a danger of falling rocks, which was nonsense really, I think. And the last few years, excluding COVID, they were charging £75 to go there with a group or individually. And now they don't do it at all, was the last I heard. They're not allowing people to go there at all. And it's such a shame because you all know, I'm sure, the left-hand side, the east side of the gardens are just incredibly formal and incredibly spectacular. But actually, on the other side, it's unkempt like that. You can see it's totally quiet. And it's got an absolutely magical atmosphere. It's a fantastic place. So if you ever do get the opportunity, whether or not you're a dowser, do try and get there, because it is very, very special. Right, how are we doing? Only another 4 hours to go, okay? I'm going to use an example of energy systems in a stone circle, using the good old Merry Maidens. Great picture, that. I didn't take it. I can't remember, what's the name, Cheryl, of that photographer? He's always putting photographs on the custom.
Jim Pearson?
Yeah, I think so.
He does a lot now.
Yeah, he did give me permission to use it, so it's a really good one. So yeah, really interesting place. I'm sure many of you will have been there, mainly because it's so easy to get at. Our ancestors weren't terribly keen or didn't think forward enough to put all our ancient sites right next to roads. Thank goodness. But this one is, and you can walk across to it. Looking from above, it's relatively unusual in that it's an actual circle. And I got quite cross recently when one of these expert dowsers came down and published a blog saying that because it was a circle, it must be fake. And I thought, well, a circle is about the easiest geometrical shape you could draw, isn't it? Why is it likely to be a fake? Needless to say, archaeological evidence is that it's original, and only 3 of the stones are believed to have been re-erected in the late 1800s. So it's a very good example of its type. Now, earlier on I was talking about water, and if one is dowsing a stone circle, the first thing you look for really is the water, because it's so important. So this is not a very good slide, I'm afraid, but I'll try and translate it. If we're looking from above, like we are with the stone circle there, if we're looking from above, you'll see this one, it looks a bit like a squash spider. So we've got water from deep underground coming upwards, and then as it through the cracks in the rock, because it's got a platform or heavy rocks over the top, it can't get through to the surface and become an ordinary spring. So it actually comes out in different layers, like on this slide. There's your underground water source being pushed up through, coming out at different levels, cracks in the rocks, but not coming up onto the surface. Now the funny thing is that if you were to douse that stone circle, there's one of these water lines on every stone. What about that? That's really interesting. So what does that mean? Chicken and egg. Which came first? Don't know. But it's there to be doused for. And I'm not alone in finding this. I'm going to say thousands of dowsers over the world find the same thing. So if we're looking at the blind spring, which in fact is generally thought to be slightly off-centre in Merry Maidens, and excuse me, I've got shaky hands, which is not very good with Google Paint. It wasn't very good at it. But you can see here, I've just given a few of the water lines that are doused out to the stones. And then as there's a sort of spin, as the water comes up from underneath, it spins, and so you've got this fantastic spiral which comes out and comes out and comes out, and goes out, in fact, a long way, way beyond the circle. So it's the sort of energetic force of that water. And a lot of that is what we can sense. This one, we've got an energy lay, or energy line, or energy current running through the circle, and then there are different radials going out to each stone, different to the water lines. And they all seem to end in this little curly bit just outside the circle. What does that mean? Don't know. But it's there, and loads of daisies find them. Each individual stone has its own energy field. They've all got the spiral, they've all got spiral lines going out, they've all got radial lines going out. And it's a really fascinating business to get your dowsing rod. How do you do this, by the way? You just fill your dowsing rod, and you get into the focus, you're looking what you're found, and you ask the tip of the dowsing rod to follow the energy, and it will just lead you around like that. That's how you do it, and then you can plot it on a map. So that's the way to find out more about the circle. Are there missing stones? Obviously in a lot of them there are. I mean, loads of you have been up to Menontoll, for instance. How many people know that actually Menontoll is a stone circle? And the stones, as far as I can know the days, they're still there under the ground, most of them. So there was talk about English Heritage hoping to clear that and expose them, but I'm not sure it'll ever happen. It's a shame, because it's far more complex monument than just the three stones that you can see above ground. So very much, interact with these things, and the more you dowse with them, the more that you can find the information from a dowsing point of view. So going back to this, you can actually find that you can find energy lines interlocking the stones, so they're like weaving together. Each stone has its spiral, each one has its radials. So you see the whole thing is turning out like a massive machine to do something. And that's the question, isn't it? What does it do? What's it for? Unfortunately, nobody's ever found a handbook. But there are lots and lots of ideas, lots and lots of ideas about what it was for, what the origin is, all that sort of thing. You will have heard from Cheryl before and Karen Kennett, if you came to her talk, that there are good reasons for thinking that they had some sort of calendar significance. In other words, the stones are pointing at a certain star system, or they're aligned to the moon or the sun, certain astronomical effects as the world went through its season. I mean, I think it's all of those. I think they were multi-purpose, these sites. I think they were meeting places. I think they were probably trading places where tribes could come in. I mean, this is a long time ago, don't forget. You're talking of 3,000-4,000 years ago, and different values were ascribed to things then. What is really interesting is that any of these things are left at all. Obviously, people through the hundreds and hundreds of years that have gone on since have generally left them alone. There was a terrible case this week I read about, where, have you heard of Carnac in France? It was a massive complex of energy stone and selling stones, 3,000 or something. And somebody, a developer, has knocked down a complex of nearly 40 stones to build a supermarket. Can you imagine that happening in this country? Excuse me, we just want to move Stonehenge out the way to build a Tesco 24. Oh, no problem. So somehow, generally speaking, these things are left alone. And I think a lot of the reasons are the superstitions that are attached to them. In other words, if you knock down a standing stone or damage a stone circle or dig out a barrow, well, the cattle will go barren and be ill, your wife won't have any more babies, your crops will fail, and all the rest of it. And so, thank goodness for these quite powerful superstitions, which probably did help keep these things safe and untouched, or just hidden in the landscape. One interesting idea that I came across recently was that, in fact, I didn't hear about it recently, I heard about it years ago. There was a man called Tom Graves, who was a very famous dowser during the 80s, wrote a lot of books, and his idea was that these are acupuncture pins in the landscape. So if you imagine a time when Neolithic people were just gradually giving up their hunter-gatherer status and turning into early farmers, and they could sense these energies just like we could, and somehow somebody had a light bulb moment where they realised that by placing stones in certain of these troublesome places, they would earth that non-beneficial energy. It's remarkable now. I mean, there's so many photographs I've seen, not got one for you, but you can see cattle giving birth inside a stone circle. Everybody feels something if they relax inside a stone circle. It's like you're shielded from what else is outside in the landscape. And so I think there's definitely some sort of calming influence, which is the effect of the stones being placed in the landscape, whether it's a single standing stone or a monument like this. There's a dowser now called Patrick McManaway, who has been a friend of ours for a quarter of a century, I suppose, and he's been experimenting and practicing, helping out farmers in Australia, Britain, and in America by placing stones or other such monuments in areas which are not producing good crops for whatever reason, or cattle are getting ill or whatever. And he's got a remarkable success rate of recreating what we think these Neolithic people were doing. We keep trying to get him to write a book, but hopefully you won't do. But he's a remarkable chap because he's applied all these principles into his work with real benefit to many farmers. And the fact that he keeps, you can imagine Australian farmers, the archetypal image of the hard-bitten Aussie farmer, can't you? And some bloke comes along with dowsing rods and starts talking about putting stones up. Can you imagine how that goes down? And yet they keep inviting him back because it works. It's incredible. So I think we're onto something there. I think that, I think the calendar is great and very valid and definitely is a case. I think the shielding from harmful energies or non-beneficial energies is a valid argument, but it also has a benefit on the surrounding area. So I think they're multi-aspect monuments, really. And of course, this goes on. All these energies, you find them in an old church, because so many pre-Reformation churches were built on ancient sites, whether it was a holy well or a standing stone or whatever. Everybody would come along and build whatever they thought was right on top, which is why a lot of them are on mounds. Right? So, these energies are not exclusive to the stones. They're all over the place, and it's just a question of finding them. There's another one up on Chapel Cambrai. There's this fantastic early Neolithic long-barrow which built into a rock. And that's got energies like that as well that you can dowse for. Remarkable place. I'm sure some of you will have been up on Chapel Cambrai on a clear day, overlooking the airport, and if you're lucky, the Scillies and all the rest of it. Fantastic viewpoint. Very deeply significant to our ancestors. There are so many monuments hidden away up there. It's quite remarkable. Other things that we might find standing stones for is like this stone row. What are they doing? Not quite sure. Are they pointing at something? This is a stone row in southwest of Ireland that John and I found when we were tramping across a hillside one day. Not marked on any maps at all, not referred to, but it was just there, and it's so deliberate, but we couldn't work out what it was pointing at, but it was something significant. Another thing to look for in the stone circles is mimicking the landscape features. This is the 9 Boskedman circle up on the wall, and you see the notch there, which is pretty close to the notch in Conculver. Somehow these things are so often deliberate. I mean, there's a gate post, what is supposed to be an Iron Age gate post, but I suspect it's older, on Trincron Hill. And when you get behind it and look at St Michael's map, the two are exactly the same shape. You know, that just doesn't happen in granite. You know, somebody's done that. So yeah, it's interesting business. Now, some of you might have heard of a thing called geopathic stress. It's unhelpful energy coming from the Earth. There are natural causes, like the water can cause problems sometimes, geological faults can cause problems, and human activities can cause problems. Lots of things. If these energies are disturbed, they can upset the natural balance of the landscape. I mean, in Scandinavia, they have their, is it in Scandinavia? They have their gnomes, don't they? You know, they're not allowed to build anywhere unless you check it out with the gnomes. These are gnomes, right? Every culture has got this sort of idea that the Earth has got its natural harmony and it's sort of controlled or kept in balance. When we come along and build our railways and dig holes in the ground and do all sorts of things that we might need to do, building roads, we can upset that balance. So it's something that isn't new. There's some people who say, oh, geopathic stress, it's just yet another thing where people are just putting stuff on, really. They just think they're sensitive. But I just want to read you something which may demonstrate that geopathic stress is not something that was invented by drug-crazed hippies in the 60s. I'll read this. Men are affected by streams of varying potency issuing from the earth. Some of these drive them mad or cause disease and death. The effect of others is good, soothing and beneficial. That was written by Plutarch in 45 to 125 AD, just yesterday. Another one. Where plants perish and animals are absent, there you should not live. That place is unhealthy. You will experience disharmony and lose your poise. When you, however, find the place where happy, vital and healthy people live, and many old folk are in good health, then stay there, and you will soon do without medicine or physician. The mysterious forces of the earth will make you healthy. And that was written by Nostradamus in the early 1500s. You see, this has been known about for a long time, all this stuff. And it's not new. And I think the wonderful thing is that with dowsing, you can interact with these energies and you can have an effect. It's very strange, but I totally recommend it. Acupuncture points. Ring of Dodka in Orkney. Very powerful place. This is one I prepared earlier. That's a stone circle that Jill and I built in our garden in the Forest of Dean when we lived up there. We built that in 2001 when we were baby dowsers and didn't really know what we were doing. But we researched it and we built it in accordance with as many characteristics of stone circles that we could find. So in other words, the stones were aligned to an underground stream which were there. There was a little tiny energy lake which was running through it, which is a bit of luck. The inner surfaces of the stones are concave or smooth, which is another feature of stone circles which is worth thinking about. Next time you're in one, you have a look. And you'll find that they are definitely rough on the outside and smooth and curved on the inside, quite often. And it's thought lots of experiments have been done with sound, drumming, all sorts of experiments with sound, producing sounds. And some people consider that that's a way of the ceremony going on inside the circle and sort of focusing and concentrating that sound. And perhaps even keeping the hoi polloi away outside so they can't hear or see what's going on. And we did all that. And what was remarkable there is that the blind spring, I kick myself now because when the little spring was underneath there, it was tiny. I didn't measure it, I didn't dowse for the strength of that string. And I'm really sad about that. But anyway, we put up these circles, which was great fun. And there were 9 strings. And when we'd finished building it, I looked at it, I thought, I don't like it being 9, stupidly. And so I put in a 10th stone. But what was interesting, that within 2 weeks, there was a stream, underground stream, going to that new stone. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And because it's on a slope, that part of the garden down there, from then on, was always incredibly wet. So something had stimulated that stream. And also the spiral of energy started off there and went out. By the time we left, 9 years later, it was over a quarter of a mile. It was a dowsable spiral. And I'm happy to say that on Google Earth I can still see it's there. So that's really nice to know. I'm very sorry to leave that. Before I close, I just want to plug the Cornish Ancient Sites Protection Network, CASPN, which I hope you've all heard about. You would not be able to see many of the sites in Penwith if it wasn't for CASPN and its work for over 25 years. 25 years, into the 26th year now. CASPN and a small team of volunteers have been clearing access and the sites. And much underrated work, which is just so important. And if you ever get the chance, do have a look at the website, CornishAncientSites.com. And you're always welcome to come along and wield a pair of shears once a month when the group is out clearing sites. If CASPN hadn't done this work, not many of these places would be visible now. And that work has been expanded and carried on by the Penwith Landscape Partnership, which is now coming to an end, sadly, and we've been working very closely with them over the past 6 years. And a lot of more sites have been opened up. And if you're interested in exploring more of the little-known sites, if you go on to penwithlandscape.com, we've got CASPN-designed trails around loads of the different sites which are now open. And so it's a fantastic resource that if you're at all interested in exploring, you don't have to be dowsing, but just go and feel the energy, because we can talk about whether it's this sort of energy or that sort of energy, but I always think actually there are dowsers who research endlessly about whether it's a type C line or a type Z47 line, or what is this or what is that. And I always think, how do you feel? How does it feel to you? And so when you go into these places, just be still and feel, and you'll be amazed at what you can pick up, even if you're not a dowser. So there we go. That's the end of my talk. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Deadly silence.
You just mentioned Penwith Landscape Partnership, and sadly they are closing.
Yes.
Will that website and all this material
Good
still
question.
exist?
Yeah, part of the deal is the lead partner is the Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and they've undertaken to keep the website going for at least 5 years. It's been mothballed, so that all the resource is there, and it's really good. Yeah.
So the links to CASPN and all the others.
Oh, it's all on there. If
there.
you look at CASPN, the CornishAncientSites.com or PenwithLandscape.com, it's all there.
Oh, good.
And it's
I'm
really
so
good.
sad that they're stopping.
People are beginning to use them, and the more people use the paths and the sites, the better, more accessible they become.
And all those volunteers that Penwith have trained, they all still work for CASPN.
We are banding together a legacy,
Pardon?
because we're banding together arrangements for the legacy of the partnership. So what's happened is that we're now working with the Cornwall Heritage Trust AONB, National Trust, the Penrith volunteers themselves, and of course Caspin. We're having a joint coordinator to provide people with a calendar which will show exactly what's going on what site on what day, and people can then choose which team they want to come on and interchange between them. So it's quite exciting. I mean, the lottery gave us £4 million, I think. So they need to know that money was well spent, and they need to know that the work is not wasted. And so a lot of effort has now gone into that to keep the legacy going. It's something that I'm very involved with anyway. Because I hate to see it wasted. You know, because there were people who said at the start, oh, these people are coming down with this bigger bag of money and they'll do that for a couple of years, then they'll go away and it'll go back to normal again. We're not going to let that happen.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, hello.
You mentioned about doing a course.
Sorry, Kelly, I can't hear you.
You mentioned about doing a beginner's course in Dowsing.
Next beginner's course.
Yeah,
Thank you.
how do people find out about that?
It's on my website, dowsingplace.co.uk, or Trencom Dowsers, which is the group that Jill runs, our local dowsing group, trencomdowsers.org.uk. And it'll be in the autumn, sometime late September into October. There'll be a beginner's day, which we normally run at Marazion, but it might move around a bit. So everybody's welcome to come along. Yeah. Anyone else? John, you're going to ask me a really awkward question now.
No, not really. It's with regard to stone circles. I've read that there's been some work with a Geiger counter on circles, comparing the different levels, in different parts. Inside the circle it's supposed to be less. I don't know. Could you say more about that?
I can't say much about it because I'm going to cross over what Cheryl's going to talk about in November.
Well, just briefly, we did do some Geiger monitoring of the stone circles in West Ham Way, and a very curious pattern emerged that the background radiation was, as you might expect in Cornwall, very high. They give off a lot of radiation. When you got to the circles, it was very high because of the 19 usually standing stones forming the circles. But when we got to the centres of the circle, and this was particularly so at the Merry Maidens and at Cregasil, the readings on the Geiger counter dropped to virtually zero. So, and nobody really knows why. But it appears that in the centre of these circles, which must be somewhere near the watercourses that John was talking about, that are at the centre of all the stone circles, it's almost like a sanctuary where radiation is not being emitted.
Yeah. It's part of this
any
calming
theories
thing,
about
isn't it?
that? Well, I've heard lots of theories over the years, but nobody really knows why that should be.
That's why all these monuments is not just a pile of old rocks. They are very complex things, and I love the mystery of them, actually. I think that's great that we don't know all the answers. People can work out what it means to them. Anyone else? No?
We'll have another quick one, actually.
Yeah.
Given there's so much scepticism about dowsing, it strikes me that the army are using it, and also all the utility companies use professional dowsers or have outfit dowsers on their books. It's a way of marrying the two. I mean, people will listen to the army, they'll listen to utility companies, they'll listen to people actually proving that it works because it actually they're actually retaining these people.
If only that were true.
But is that true?
That were true. One of the society's water dowsers actually spent a long time getting permission to visit the Royal Engineers archives, and found all the evidence, that this is what they did. This is why they trained these guys, so that they could find the water in the middle of the desert or whatever. And it works. They did it for years and years and years. But they will not come out now and say so, because people will laugh at them. There was a case, I don't know if you saw it, in the newspapers 3, 4 years ago. It's all a blur with COVID, isn't it? But I think perhaps 4 years ago, when a couple were having waterboarding, and the waterboard were trying to trace the water pipe because the maps aren't always very good. And shock horror, they noticed a chap with dowsing rods looking for this pipe, and they rang their daughter up, who was a scientist. Now, this young woman was in fact a biology student in her first year at university. She was a scientist, and she thought it was disgusting. And because she was rather young and beautiful, the media really got hold of this, and it was front page on all the newspapers. Isn't it shocking that our water companies using our money to pay these idiots with dowsing rods to find water? It's witchcraft. And that went on for a month. And the last I heard was that all water companies, apart from 2, now decline to say that they use water dowsing. And it's all because of that stupid woman who's so narrow-minded. And the media, the power of the media to mock. You know. But like I said, I think I said earlier, you know, if it didn't work, these people wouldn't use it, would they? You know, that's what I can't understand it. But I'm afraid dowsing is a bit like Marmite. You know, you either love it or hate it, and it does seem to pull out these extremes of views. And there are all sorts of reasons for that, which I could go on for another 10 minutes about, but I won't. Is that it? Anybody else? Thank you for being so attentive. Very nice to meet you all.
What did you say your website was again?
My personal website
Where we look for more information on the courses and stuff?
Dowsing Place.
What?
Dowsing Place, Place, dowsingplace.co.uk.
Thank you.
That's me. All right. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say thank you, and again, thank you for all coming. So I just want to give John a massive round of applause.